In the dying light of ancient stars, there exists a name whispered only in the darkest corners of the galaxy. A name that should have been forgotten. A name that refused to die. 4,000 years before the rise of the Empire, a Jedi Knight stood before his master in a temple meditation chamber. The air grew cold, a lightsaber ignited, and in that single moment of crimson fury, the galaxy changed forever. But that was only the beginning. Imagine a tomb buried deep beneath a city, where a spirit waits in eternal patience, whispering corruption into the dreams of kings. Imagine a power so absolute that death itself became merely an inconvenience, a minor obstacle on the path to domination. Imagine one man's ambition stretching across 40 centuries, touching countless lives, toppling dynasties, and reshaping entire worlds. His name was Freedon Nadd, and his story is one of terrible beauty and haunting tragedy. From promising Jedi Knight to feared Sith Lord, from living conqueror to immortal ghost, from forgotten legend to the architect of galactic war, this is the tale of the man who killed his master, learned from the dead, ruled for a century, and then haunted an entire planet for 4,000 years. Tonight we explore the complete saga of Freedon Nadd, the Sith Lord whose influence reached across millennia, from his fall as a Jedi to his reign of terror and his final destruction. This is a story of power, corruption, and the price of immortality in the Star Wars Legends universe. So before you settle in, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Here is something fascinating. Around 71% of you watching right now haven't subscribed yet. If you are enjoying these deep dives into Star Wars lore, hitting that subscribe button genuinely helps this channel grow and bring you more stories like this. Drop a comment below telling me where in the world you are listening from and what time it is right now. I always love seeing our community span across different time zones and continents. Are you winding down for the night in Europe? Just starting your evening in the Americas, or perhaps greeting the morning in Asia or Australia? Let me know. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that gentle ambient sound. Get comfortable under your blanket, and let's journey together into the ancient darkness of the Old Republic, where legends were born and evil never truly dies. Our tale begins approximately 4,400 years before the Battle of Yavin, in an era when the Jedi Order stood at the height of its power and influence. The Republic stretched across thousands of systems, and the Sith were believed to be nothing more than ancient history, dark myths told to young Padawans as cautionary tales. On Coruscant, the gleaming jewel of the galaxy, the Jedi Temple rose toward the sky like a mountain of faith and light. Within its sacred halls, thousands of Jedi trained in the ways of the Force, dedicating their lives to peace, knowledge, and the protection of the innocent. The temple's meditation chambers hummed with tranquil energy. Training halls echoed with the snap and hiss of practice lightsabers. The archives held wisdom gathered across millennia, and in the council chambers, the wisest masters of the age guided the order with patient wisdom. It was here, in this bastion of light, that a young man named Freedon Nadd completed his trials and became a Jedi Knight. Freedon Nadd was, by every measure, exceptional, tall and commanding in presence, with piercing eyes that seemed to see through deception and into the heart of truth itself. His connection to the Force was profound, almost unnaturally strong. He could move objects with barely a thought, sense disturbances across vast distances, and his skill with a lightsaber bordered on the artistic fellow Jedi spoke of him with mixture of admiration and unease. Masters noted his potential with cautious optimism. But there was something else beneath the surface, an intensity, an impatience, a hunger. Freedon Nadd believed, deeply and completely, that he was destined for greatness, not the quiet greatness of a humble Jedi Master teaching younglings, but something more, something legendary. He studied ancient texts with obsessive focus, He pushed himself beyond the prescribed training regimens. He questioned constantly why the Jedi limited themselves, why they held back from exploring the full depths of the Force. His master, a patient and wise Jedi named Master Tremaine, watched these tendencies with growing concern. Master Tremaine was everything a Jedi should be: calm, measured, deeply connected to the living Force. He had trained other students successfully, guiding them to become respected knights and even council members. He believed in the power of patience, in trusting the will of the Force rather than forcing one's own will upon it. But Freedon Nadd heard these teachings and felt only frustration. In the meditation gardens where water flowed over ancient stones and the air smelled of night-blooming jasmine, Master Tremaine would speak to his apprentice of balance, of surrender, of accepting one's place in the grand design of the Force. And Freedon Nadd would nod, would appear to listen, while inside a different voice grew stronger. A voice that whispered of unlimited power, of secrets the Jedi refused to teach, of ancient knowledge buried and forbidden. A voice that promised him everything he desired, if only he had the strength to reach out and take it. The other Jedi sensed nothing. They saw only a talented knight, perhaps a bit prideful but devoted to the Order. They did not see the storm gathering in his soul. They did not sense the moment approaching when everything would shatter. That moment was closer than anyone knew. The breaking point came on an evening like any other. Master Tremaine had called Freedon Nadd to a private meditation chamber overlooking the Coruscant cityscape. The sun was setting, painting the endless towers in shades of amber and crimson. Billions of lights were beginning to flicker to life across the planet-wide city. It should have been beautiful. It should have been peaceful. But Freedon Nadd felt only rage. "You have great power, my student," Master Tremaine began, his voice gentle as always. "But power without wisdom is merely destruction waiting to happen. The Force is not a tool to be wielded for personal glory. It is a river in which we swim, a wind that carries us. We do not control it, we serve it." Nadd had heard these words 1,000 times before. Each repetition felt like a chain being wrapped tighter around his potential. "And what if the Force wants more from me?" he asked, struggling to keep his voice level. "What if my destiny is something greater than simply serving?" The old master smiled with infuriating patience. "Destiny is not something we chase, Freedon. It is something we discover through humility and service. You are still young. There is time to learn. Time, always time. As if time would somehow transform ambition into contentment, hunger into satisfaction." Nadd looked at his master and saw everything he feared becoming: an old man who had spent his entire life teaching others to limit themselves, to accept less, to be grateful for mediocrity disguised as wisdom. "The ancient Jedi were not so cautious," Nadd said, his words coming faster now. "I have read the old texts. The Jedi of earlier ages explored all aspects of the Force. They did not arbitrarily declare entire realms of knowledge forbidden." Master Tremaine's expression grew more serious. "Those explorations led to the 100-year darkness. They led to the creation of the Sith. Thousands died, because Jedi believed, as you do now, that they could handle powers beyond their understanding. That history is written in blood, Freedon. We must not repeat it." "Or perhaps," Nadd replied, and his voice had gone very quiet, "the lesson is that the strongest survived, that power found its rightful masters." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Master Tremaine stood slowly, his hand moving unconsciously toward his lightsaber. "Freedon, listen to yourself. These thoughts, this path you are walking, it leads only to suffering. The dark side promises strength, but delivers only emptiness. I have seen it before. Please, let me help you." Help. The word struck Nadd like an insult. He did not need help. He needed freedom. Freedom from rules that existed only to keep the weak safe from the strong. Freedom from a philosophy that demanded he cripple himself to make others comfortable. "You cannot help me," Nadd said, and his lightsaber was in his hand before he consciously decided to draw it. "You can only hold me back." The blue blade ignited with its familiar snap hiss. Master Tremaine's face filled with sorrow rather than fear. "Do not do this, my student. There is still time to turn back from this precipice." But Freedon Nadd had already fallen. He simply had not hit the ground yet. What happened next took less than a minute, but would echo across 4,000 years. Master Tremaine was skilled, experienced, connected deeply to the Force, but he was also old, and more importantly, he hesitated. Some part of him could not truly believe his student would kill him. That hesitation was fatal. Nadd's blade moved with terrible precision. The Force flowed through him in ways it never had before, wild and electric and intoxicating. He felt his master's shock and pain through their training bond, felt the exact moment when Master Tremaine's life force left his body and joined the cosmic force. The old Jedi crumpled to the floor. The chamber's beautiful view remained unchanged. Billions of lights still flickered across Coruscant. The universe continued, utterly indifferent to one man's death and another man's damnation. Freedon Nadd stood over his master's body, lightsaber still humming in his hand, and waited to feel remorse. Surely such an act should bring guilt, horror, some overwhelming emotional consequence, but all he felt was a strange calm, and beneath that calm, an exhilaration he had never known before. He had been right. The Jedi Code was not universal truth. It was simply philosophy, and philosophy could be rejected. The Force did not punish him for what he had done. If anything, he felt more connected to it than ever before, as if some barrier had been shattered. When he looked in the polished metal surface of the chamber wall, his reflection stared back with eyes that gleamed with an amber light he had never seen before. Not quite yellow yet, but no longer the clear eyes of a Jedi. Something in between. Something transforming. Nadd deactivated his lightsaber and walked calmly from the chamber. He passed other Jedi in the halls, and they nodded to him with friendly respect. They sensed nothing wrong. The dark side had taught him his first lesson already. Deception, the ability to hide his true nature behind a mask of normalcy. He returned to his quarters and gathered only what he would need. A few credits, his lightsaber, some basic supplies, and most importantly, a datapad containing every restricted file he had secretly copied from the archives. References to the Sith, locations of ancient dark side temples, fragmentary accounts of the 100-year darkness, and the Jedi who had fallen before him. By the time Master Tremaine's body was discovered, Freedon Nadd was already off-world, the Jedi temple shrinking behind him as his ship climbed toward the stars. He took one last look at the massive structure, that mountain of misguided nobility, and felt nothing but contempt. They would come after him eventually. They would call his action murder rather than liberation. They would condemn him without understanding that he had simply seen through their comfortable lies to the truth beneath. Power was not evil. Ambition was not wrong. The Force belonged to those strong enough to truly embrace it, not to those who cowered behind artificial limitations. The Jedi had failed him, but somewhere in the galaxy, ancient knowledge awaited. The Sith, those legendary dark warriors the Order spoke of only in whispers, they had understood, they had not been afraid of their own strength. And if their knowledge still existed somewhere, hidden in forgotten temples or encoded in ancient holocrons, Freedon Nadd would find it. His master's blood was still fresh on his hands, metaphorically if not literally. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in his life, Freedon Nadd felt truly free, free to become what he was always meant to be. Not a servant of the Force, but its master. The darkness embraced him, and he embraced it in return, and the galaxy trembled, though it did not yet know why. The galaxy, Freedon Nadd discovered, was full of shadows. For months he traveled alone, following fragmentary clues from the restricted files he had stolen. The mainstream history taught in the Jedi Temple painted the Sith as extinct, vanquished 1,000 years ago in conflicts whose details had been deliberately obscured. But Nadd had learned to read between the lines, to find truth in what was conspicuously absent from the records. His journey took him first to Korriban, the ancient Sith homeworld. The planet was a wasteland of rust-colored sand and jagged stone, orbiting a dying red sun. The Valley of the Dark Lord stretched before him like an open wound in the world itself, lined with massive tombs carved into the cliff faces. These were the burial places of the greatest Sith Lords of antiquity, beings whose names had been systematically erased from Republic history. Nadd spent weeks exploring the tombs, pushing deeper into passages that had not been walked in centuries. The air tasted of dust and decay, and something else, something that made the Force itself feel heavier, darker. Many chambers had been looted long ago by treasure hunters who did not survive to enjoy their prizes. Their desiccated remains served as grim markers in the deeper passages. But Nadd was not looking for gold or jewels. He was looking for knowledge, and he found fragments of it. Inscriptions on walls in the angular script of the ancient Sith, broken holocrons that flickered with corrupted data. Meditation chambers where the residue of dark side energy still clung like morning frost. Each discovery taught him something new. Techniques for channeling anger into raw power. Methods for bending weak minds to his will. The philosophical foundations of the Sith Code, so different from the passionless dogma of the Jedi. Yet it was not enough. These were scraps, pieces of a greater whole. The most powerful knowledge had been taken or destroyed. The deepest secrets remained hidden. His search led him next to Zayast, another world sacred to the ancient Sith Empire. Then to Dromund Kaas, where the ruins of a dark-side citadel stood overgrown with jungle. Then to Relg, to Asha's Re, to a dozen other forgotten places marked on maps that predated the modern Republic. At each location he found the same pattern, evidence of incredible power once wielded here, echoes of knowledge once possessed, but always incomplete, always insufficient. Months became a year. His frustration grew. He was stronger now than he had been as a Jedi. That much was certain. He could feel the dark side responding to his will like a living thing, could sense its currents and eddies across space. But strength without direction was merely chaos. He needed a teacher, someone who truly understood the Sith ways, not just the broken remnants they had left behind. In a cantina on some forgettable mid-rim world, he encountered a Zabrak mercenary covered in ritual tattoos. The being claimed to have trained under a dark side cult in the unknown regions. Nadd paid for the information and followed the coordinates to a hidden compound on an ice world whose name he never learned. The cult was small, barely 24 members, but they possessed genuine dark side techniques. Their leader, a human woman who had taken the name Darth Revan, claimed lineage from the ancient Sith. She was powerful, more powerful than most Jedi Nadd had known. She taught him to draw strength from pain, to use fear as a weapon, to kill with the Force itself rather than a lightsaber. But after 3 months of training, Nadd realized the truth. She was not a true Sith. None of them were. They were scavengers playing with powers they only partially understood, cobbling together philosophies from incomplete sources. They called themselves Sith, but they were children playing at darkness. When he left, he burned their compound to the ground. They had served their purpose. The pattern repeated itself across the galaxy. Dark side cults hiding in the shadows of civilization, fallen Jedi who had glimpsed the dark side and mistaken a sip of water for the entire ocean. Force-sensitive criminals who used their abilities for petty crime, wasting potential that could have reshaped worlds. Each one taught him something. Each one disappointed him in the end. He meditated for days in a cave on Dagobah, a world so soaked in dark side energy that the Force itself felt twisted and wrong. In his visions he saw glimpses of something greater. Ancient wars that had torn the galaxy apart, Sith Lords who commanded armies and toppled civilizations, power on a scale that made his current abilities seem laughable. And he saw a name, Naga Sadow, Dark Lord of the Sith, Master of Sith alchemy and sorcery, leader of the invasion that had brought the Sith Empire into conflict with the Old Republic in what history remembered as the Great Hyperspace War. A being of such power that even in defeat, even in death, his legacy had endured. Naga Sadow. The visions showed Nadd a moon covered in jungle, massive stone temples rising above the canopy, and a tomb where something waited, something that had not truly died. Returning to his ship, Nadd accessed what fragmentary historical records existed of the Great Hyperspace War. The conflict had ended approximately 300 years ago with a complete defeat of the Sith Empire. Naga Sadow had fled to the Yavin system, establishing a fortress on the system's fourth moon. There, according to Republic intelligence from that era, he had died surrounded by the primitive Massassi warriors he had brought with him. But what if death had not been the end? What if the greatest Dark Lord of that age had found a way to persist beyond physical destruction? The Sith, Nadd had learned, were masters of defying natural law. If anyone could have conquered death itself, it would have been Naga Sadow. The Yavin system was in the outer rim, far from the major hyperspace routes. It had been marked as off-limits by the Republic after the war, though that prohibition had likely been forgotten by now. Few would have reason to visit such a remote and unremarkable system. Freedon Nadd set his navigation computer for Yavin. The journey would take weeks through little-used hyperspace routes. He spent the time in meditation, preparing himself for what he might find. If Naga Sadow's spirit truly persisted, if he truly was waiting in that distant tomb, then Nadd would need to prove himself worthy of such a master's attention. He practiced the dark side techniques he had learned, refining them, perfecting them. He reached out through the Force toward his destination, trying to sense what awaited him there. And sometimes, in the deepest meditations, he thought he felt something reaching back. A presence vast and ancient and utterly inhuman, acknowledging him across the light years. When his ship finally dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Yavin system, the massive gas giant filled his viewport like a painting done in shades of orange and red. 4 moons orbited the giant planet, and Nadd's instruments identified the fourth as the one he sought, the jungle moon of Yavin 4, where the greatest teacher of the dark side awaited his final student. The jungle of Yavin 4 was alive in ways that went beyond biology. As Freedon Nadd descended through the atmosphere, he could feel the moon's presence in the Force like a physical pressure against his consciousness. This was not merely a world strong in the dark side. This was a world that had been transformed by it, altered on a fundamental level by the centuries of Sith alchemy and sorcery that had soaked into its soil like blood into sand. His ship landed in a clearing near the largest of the temple complexes. The moment he stepped onto the landing ramp, the heat and humidity struck him like a wall. The air was thick with the scent of rotting vegetation and something else, something that smelled faintly of copper and ozone. The sounds of the jungle surrounded him, but they were wrong somehow. The calls of creatures that should not exist, rustling in the undergrowth that suggested movements too large and too deliberate to be natural. The temple before him was a massive stepped pyramid, easily 200 meters tall, constructed from enormous blocks of stone that had been carved with intricate designs. Even after 3 centuries of abandonment, it remained imposing, though vines now crawled across its surface and trees grew from cracks in its upper levels. At its base, a wide stairway led up to a dark entrance like an open mouth. Nadd approached slowly, every sense alert. The Masasi warriors that Naga Sado had brought to this moon were supposedly all dead, but the jungle held dangers that went beyond anything living. Dark side energy pooled in certain places like invisible quicksand. Sith alchemy had created creatures that existed in violation of natural law, and if his visions were true, a spirit haunted this place, a consciousness that had refused to pass into the cosmic force. The stairway stretched upward forever, or so it seemed. By the time he reached the temple entrance, sweat had soaked through his clothing. The opening was a carved archway covered in Sith runes that hurt to look at directly, symbols that seemed to writhe and shift when viewed from the corner of his eye. Beyond the archway, darkness waited. Nadd ignited his lightsaber. The blue blade pushed back the shadows only slightly, as if the darkness here was thicker, more resistant to light. He stepped through the entrance and into the temple proper. The interior was vast, a cathedral of darkness supported by pillars carved to resemble twisted humanoid figures in poses of agony or ecstasy. It was impossible to tell which. The floor was smooth stone, worn by the passage of countless feet over centuries, and everywhere, covering every surface, were more inscriptions in the angular Sith script. Some he could now read, having studied the language during his travels. Others were in older dialects that predated even the Sith Empire. His footsteps echoed in the enormous space as he moved deeper into the temple. Side passages branched off into darkness, but something drew him forward, pulling him toward the heart of the structure. The force itself seemed to flow in that direction, like water seeking the lowest point. The central chamber, when he finally reached it, took his breath away. It was circular and massive, perhaps 50 meters across, with a domed ceiling that rose high overhead. The walls were covered entirely in carved reliefs depicting scenes from Sith history, great wars and terrible rituals, sorcerers commanding lightning and fire, warriors in ancient armor wielding weapons of dark side energy, and everywhere, repeated again and again in the carvings, a single figure, tall and regal, with the angular features and red skin of the Sith pureblood species, Naga Sado. In the center of the chamber stood a raised dais, and on the dais rested a sarcophagus of black stone. Unlike the rest of the temple, it was completely free of vines or debris, as if something kept it clean. Approaching it, Nadd could feel power radiating from it like heat from a fire. This was not the residual energy of ancient rituals. This was something active, something aware. He reached the sarcophagus and placed his hand on its surface. The stone was cold, despite the jungle heat. Carved into its top was the same figure from the wall reliefs, rendered in exquisite detail. Naga Sado in repose, hands folded across his chest, face serene. "I have come seeking knowledge," Nadd said aloud, his voice echoing strangely in the vast space. "I have come seeking power. I have come seeking a master who can teach me the true ways of the Sith." For a long moment, nothing happened. The jungle sounds filtered in from outside. His lightsaber hummed softly, and Nadd began to wonder if his visions had been wrong, if he had traveled all this way for nothing. Then the temperature dropped so suddenly that his breath became visible. The force itself seemed to contract, as if reality was bending around a point of impossible density, and before him, rising from the sarcophagus like smoke taking form, a figure materialized. Naga Sado appeared as he must have looked in life, though rendered translucent and glowing with a faint crimson light. He was tall, perhaps 2 meters, with the distinctive features of Sith pureblood ancestry. His skin was deep red, his face angular and proud. He wore robes that belonged to an age long past, and his eyes, those terrible eyes, burned with intelligence and malevolence that had not diminished across 3 centuries of death. The spirit regarded Nadd in silence for what felt like an eternity. When it finally spoke, its voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, resonating in Nadd's bones rather than his ears. Another comes seeking what he is not prepared to receive. Another Jedi fool who thinks reading a few forbidden texts makes him Sith. How predictable, how disappointing. Nadd forced himself not to step back, not to show fear. I am no Jedi. I killed my master and embraced the dark side. I have traveled the galaxy seeking true knowledge of the Sith. Every source I found was incomplete, every teacher insufficient, until I saw you in my visions. You killed one old man and think yourself a Dark Lord. The spirit laughed, and the sound made the temple walls vibrate. I commanded fleets that blotted out stars. I led armies that conquered worlds. I unlocked secrets of the Force that your Jedi Order has spent centuries trying to forget. You are nothing, a spark imagining itself a sun. Then make me more, Nadd replied, and there was steel in his voice now. I did not come here to be mocked by a ghost. If you are truly the great Naga Sadow, if you truly possess the knowledge you claim, then prove it, teach me. Make me the weapon the Sith were meant to forge, or admit that death has made you powerless, nothing but echoes and empty threats. The spirit's eyes flared brighter. For a moment, Nadd thought he had gone too far, that this ancient consciousness would simply destroy him for his insolence. The pressure in the Force became almost unbearable. Then suddenly, Naga Sadow smiled, and it was a smile of terrible approval. Good. Fear mixed with courage. Ambition tempered by pragmatism. You may be worth the effort, after all. Very well, fallen Jedi. I will teach you. I will show you powers that would make your former masters weep. I will transform you into something the galaxy will remember long after your flesh has turned to dust. But know this, the price of such knowledge is absolute commitment. There is no turning back from this path. No redemption, no mercy for weakness. Are you prepared to pay that price? Freedon Nadd did not hesitate. He had killed for this opportunity. He had traveled across the galaxy and into the darkest places of the Force. He had burned every bridge connecting him to his former life. There was nothing left but forward, deeper into the darkness, toward power and destiny and terrible glory. I am, he said. The spirit of Naga Sadow circled him slowly, examining him with eyes that saw more than physical form, judging, calculating. Finally, the ancient Dark Lord nodded. Then your true education begins now. Forget everything the Jedi taught you. Forget their weakness, their fear disguised as wisdom. I will teach you alchemy that rewrites the laws of life itself, sorcery that bends reality to your will, philosophy that explains the true nature of the Force, not the comforting lies your order prefers. And when I am finished, when you have absorbed everything I have to teach, you will go forth and prove that the Sith are not extinct, that we endure, that we always endure. The temple seemed to pulse with dark energy, as if the entire structure was alive and listening. Nadd extinguished his lightsaber, plunging the chamber into the crimson glow of the spirit before him, his new master, his guide into powers the Jedi could not imagine. The training would be brutal, it would remake him, but that was exactly what he wanted, to be unmade and reforged into something greater. His journey as a wandering fallen Jedi was over. His transformation into a true Sith Lord had begun. Years passed in the shadow of the jungle moon. Freedon Nadd trained under the spirit of Naga Sadow with an intensity that bordered on obsession. The ancient Dark Lord was a merciless teacher, demanding perfection and punishing failure with tests that left Nadd broken and gasping on the temple floor. But with each trial survived, each lesson absorbed, Nadd grew stronger. Sith alchemy became his specialty, the art of twisting life itself, of reshaping flesh and bone according to dark side will. Naga Sado taught him to create amulets that stored power, talismans that amplified force abilities beyond natural limits. He learned to alter living creatures, to enhance their aggression and strength, to bind them to his will with bonds stronger than any chain. The massive beasts of Yavin 4 became his test subjects, transformed into monstrosities that would have horrified the Jedi Council. Sorcery followed. Not the simple telekinesis or mind tricks that Jedi called upon, but true workings of power that required ritual and sacrifice, lightning that could be sustained indefinitely, not mere momentary bursts, illusions so complete they could fool even force sensitives, the ability to drain life force from living beings and channel it into himself. Techniques so dangerous that even attempting them without proper preparation could destroy the practitioner. And philosophy. Perhaps most importantly, philosophy. Naga Sado had lived through the golden age of the Sith Empire, when Dark Lords ruled thousands of systems, and the very structure of their civilization was built upon dark side principles. He taught Nadd that the Sith were not merely Force users who happened to be evil. They were practitioners of a coherent worldview, a complete understanding of reality that stood in opposition to everything the Jedi believed. The Jedi spoke of peace. The Sith understood that conflict was the natural state of existence, the engine that drove evolution and progress. The Jedi preached selflessness. The Sith knew that only through the perfection of self could one achieve true greatness. The Jedi feared passion. The Sith embraced it as the source of all power. Yet even as Nadd absorbed this knowledge, he began to understand a fundamental truth. Naga Sado was dead. His wisdom was vast, his power had been legendary, but he was a ghost teaching about glories that had passed into history. The Sith Empire was gone. The great Dark Lords were dust. Their knowledge survived, but their dominion had ended. If the Sith were to return, if their philosophy was to be more than ancient history studied in secret, someone would need to carry it forward. Someone living. Someone who could take everything the ancients had achieved and rebuild it in the present. One evening, as they stood atop the temple watching Yavin's massive bulk rise over the horizon, Nadd voiced this realization. "You have taught me everything," he said to the spirit beside him. "I am grateful beyond words, but this moon is a tomb. These temples are monuments to the dead. If I am to be truly Sith, I cannot remain here studying what was. I must go out into the galaxy and create what will be." Naga Sado regarded him with those burning eyes, and for once the ancient spirit looked almost pleased. "At last you understand. Knowledge without application is worthless. Power without purpose is wasted. You have learned the ways of the Sith. Now you must prove you are worthy of the title Dark Lord. Find a world. Conquer it. Rule it as the Sith Lords of old ruled their domains. Create a legacy that will outlast your flesh. Only then will you have earned what I have given you." Nadd departed Yavin 4 with a ship full of Sith artifacts, ancient holocrons, and enough alchemical knowledge to reshape entire ecosystems. But more than that, he carried a vision, not of hiding in shadows or operating in secret, but of open rule, a world where he would be acknowledged as what he was, where his power would be undeniable. The question was which world? He traveled through the Outer Rim studying possibilities. Many planets were already part of the Republic, their governments established and their populations comfortable. To conquer such a world would bring the full weight of Republic military power down upon him, and he was not yet ready for such a confrontation. He needed somewhere isolated, somewhere with problems that his power could solve, somewhere that would welcome a savior, even if that savior intended to become their master. It was during a stop at a trading outpost on the edge of known space that he heard spacers talking about Onderon, a jungle world in the Japrael sector, far from major hyperspace routes. The stories they told were strange, a human civilization split in two, locked in an endless cycle of conflict, the city dwellers of Aziz, living behind massive walls, and the beast riders outcasts and criminals, who somehow survived in the wilderness by bonding with the planet's dangerous predators. Nadd investigated further. Onderon was rich in the Force, though its inhabitants did not understand what that meant. The creatures there were naturally strong and aggressive, shaped by generations of exposure to the planet's unique energies. The human population was divided by tradition and fear, neither side able to achieve victory over the other. It was perfect. His arrival on Onderon was carefully orchestrated. He did not come as a conqueror with armies and threats. He came alone, landing his ship just outside the walls of Aziz during one of the Beast Riders' frequent attacks. The primitive warriors, mounted on huge flying creatures called Drex, were assaulting the city gates with crude weapons and raw courage. The city's defenders fought back with more advanced technology, but they were clearly losing ground. Nadd walked calmly through the chaos of battle and raised his hand. The force erupted from him in a wave that struck the attacking beast riders like a physical blow. Drexel fell from the sky. Warriors tumbled from their mounts, unconscious before they hit the ground. In less than a minute, an attack that might have lasted hours was ended. The gates of Aziz opened. The people poured out, not sure whether to be more afraid or grateful. Their king, a weak man named Galnos, who had inherited his throne without the strength to defend it, came forward with his guards. "Who are you?" the king demanded, trying to sound authoritative and failing. "What manner of power is this?" Nadd smiled. "I am a traveler who has studied ancient arts in distant places. I saw your city under attack and thought perhaps I could be of assistance. These beast riders seem to be a persistent problem for you." King Galnos's face twisted with frustration. Persistent is an understatement. "They attack almost weekly. Our ancestors exiled criminals to the wilderness, thinking they would die. Instead, they learned to tame the beasts and now make war upon us. We have fought them for generations without end." "And if someone could end it?" Nadd asked softly. "If someone had the power to finally bring peace to Onderon, would such a person be worthy of reward?" Over the following weeks, Nadd demonstrated his abilities carefully. He went into the wilderness alone and returned with beasts following him obediently, their savage nature temporarily suppressed by his will. He used Sith alchemy to alter some of the creatures, making them stronger and more controllable, then gifted them to the city guard as mounts. He taught select warriors techniques for enhancing their combat abilities through meditation and focus, never mentioning the Force by name. The people of Aziz began to worship him. This mysterious stranger who had arrived at their darkest hour and offered salvation. King Galactic grew nervous as Nadd's popularity eclipsed his own. But what could he do? Nadd had committed no crime. He had only helped. The end came during a massive beast rider assault, the largest in decades. Thousands of warriors mounted on Drexel and fierce predators called Bulmas descended upon Aziz's walls. It should have been a slaughter. Instead, Nadd walked onto the battlefield and showed Onderon what true power looked like. He did not merely defeat the beast riders. He broke them. Lightning arced from his hands in sustained torrents, incinerating warriors and beasts alike. He reached out with the Force and turned the riders' own mounts against them, creating chaos in their ranks. He demonstrated alchemy by transforming captured beasts into loyal servants on the spot, showing the beast riders that even their greatest advantage meant nothing against his abilities. When it was over, hundreds lay dead, and the survivors fled into the deepest jungle. Nadd stood alone on the battlefield, unmarked and calm, while the people of Aziz stared in awe and terror. King Galactic died that night. quietly, in his sleep. No marks on his body, no sign of violence. Just an old man whose heart had given out from the stress of recent events. That was the official explanation, and who would question it? The people of Aziz came to Nadd and begged him to take the throne. They needed him. They had seen what he could do with such a ruler. Onderon could become great, safe, prosperous. Nadd accepted their pleas with humble words that disguised his satisfaction. He had not needed to conquer Onderon through force. He had made them beg for their own subjugation. Within a month of his arrival, he wore the crown and sat upon the throne. Within a year he had codified the Beast Wars as official tradition, ensuring that criminals and dissenters would continue to be exiled to the wilderness. Not because he wanted to eliminate the Beast Riders, but because he wanted to maintain them. Conflict fed the dark side. Fear strengthened his power. The Beast Wars would continue, controlled and perpetual, a generator of suffering that would sustain him for decades to come. Onderon had a new king, and the Sith had returned to open rule for the first time in centuries. Naga Sado's final lesson had been learned perfectly. The transformation of Onderon, under Freedon Nadd's rule, was gradual but absolute to the people of Aziz. He was a god made flesh, a king whose powers went beyond anything they had seen or imagined. He protected them from the Beast Riders, while simultaneously ensuring the Beast Riders would never be completely destroyed. The Beast Wars became ritualized, almost ceremonial, a tradition that defined Onderon's culture. Every criminal, every political dissident, every person who spoke against the throne was given a choice: execution within the city walls or exile to the wilderness with a chance at survival. Most chose exile. Few survived. Those who did, those who managed to tame the savage beasts and adapt to life in the jungle, became the next generation of Beast Riders. They would attack Aziz, and Nadd's forces would drive them back, and the cycle continued. It was perfect cruelty, disguised as mercy. A system that generated constant fear, while allowing the population to believe their king was protecting them. The dark side fed on that fear, on the anger of the Beast Riders, on the pride of the city dwellers. Onderon became a nexus of dark side energy, and Nadd sat at its center like a spider in a web, drawing power from every thread. His palace dominated the highest point of Aziz, a structure of dark stone and soaring towers that could be seen from anywhere in the city. Inside, he filled the halls with artifacts from Yavin 4. Sith holocrons lined his private study. Alchemical laboratories occupied entire wings where he continued his experiments. The meditation chamber at the palace's heart was carved with the same angular Sith script that covered the temples of the jungle moon, focusing and amplifying dark side energy. He took a queen, a woman from one of Aziz's noble families. Her name has been lost to history, but she gave him children, heirs who would carry his bloodline and his knowledge forward. He began their education early, teaching them to touch the Force while they were still too young to fear it. His eldest son showed promise, his daughter even more so. The dynasty of Nadd was established, and with it the assurance that his influence would outlast his personal reign. But Nadd understood something that many rulers did not. Immortality through bloodline was insufficient. Flesh failed. Empires crumbled. If he wanted to truly endure, he needed something more direct, something the Jedi would consider an abomination, and even most Sith would hesitate to attempt. In his laboratory, surrounded by texts that predated the Republic, he began studying the techniques of essence transfer and spirit binding. Naga Sado had achieved a form of immortality by anchoring his consciousness to his physical remains and to Yavin 4 itself. Other ancient Sith had transferred their essence into new bodies, possessing the living to extend their existence indefinitely. The knowledge existed, fragmentary and dangerous, but it existed. Nadd experimented carefully. Not on himself, not yet. He used criminals and volunteers, promising them power or gold or freedom in exchange for their participation in his research. Most died horribly, their bodies unable to contain the energies he attempted to channel through them. A few survived but were driven insane, their minds shattered by contact with forces they could not comprehend. But with each failure he learned, with each death he refined his technique. He built a tomb beneath the palace, extending deep into the bedrock of Onderon. This would be his anchor point, the place where his essence would be bound if his physical body died. The chamber was carved from a single massive piece of stone, covered entirely in Sith inscriptions of binding and preservation. At its center, a sarcophagus waited, empty for now, but prepared, infused with alchemical processes that would preserve whatever it contained long past the natural decay of flesh. The years accumulated, decades passed. Nadd's hair turned gray and then white. His children grew to adulthood and had children of their own. He taught select members of his bloodline the ways of the Force, carefully measuring each one's ability to keep such knowledge secret. Some proved trustworthy. Others had to be eliminated when they showed signs of speaking too freely or challenging his authority too directly. Onderon prospered in its own twisted way. The city expanded. Trade with nearby systems brought wealth. The Beast Wars continued unabated, a tradition now so ingrained in Onderon culture that few questioned it. Young warriors from noble families would venture into the wilderness on vision quests, hoping to prove themselves by surviving in the domain of the Beast Riders. Those who returned were celebrated as heroes. Those who did not were mourned as martyrs. Nadd watched it all with satisfaction. He had created something lasting, a world shaped entirely by his will, operating according to principles that would have been impossible without his intervention. Izzy's was his monument, the Beast Wars were his legacy, and his descendants would carry forward both his blood and his dark side teachings. Yet even Sith alchemy had its limits. He felt his body beginning to fail in ways that no amount of force healing could permanently reverse. His strength, while still formidable, was not what it had been in his prime. His connection to the Force remained powerful, but the vessel that housed that connection was wearing out. He was approaching 150 years old, an impossible age by human standards, sustained only through dark side techniques and sheer force of will. But mortality caught up with everyone eventually, even Dark Lords of the Sith. In his final years, Nadd became even more reclusive. He spent most of his time in his meditation chamber, or in the tomb beneath the palace, preparing for what was to come. His children and grandchildren ran the day-to-day business of the kingdom, while he focused on the great work. His grandson, a young man who showed particular aptitude for the Force, served as his primary attendant during this time. Nadd taught him everything, holding back nothing, ensuring that the knowledge would survive. He commissioned artisans to create a sarcophagus worthy of a Sith Lord, black stone quarried from deep beneath Onderon's crust, carved with every binding rune and preservation symbol he had learned from Naga Sado's teachings. The work took years. When it was finally complete and installed in the tomb chamber, Nadd examined it with grim satisfaction. This would be his vessel. This would be the anchor that held his spirit to the physical world after his body failed. The final preparations took months. Rituals performed in the depths of night, sacrifices made in secret, power gathered and bound into the very stones of the tomb. When everything was ready, when every contingency had been addressed, Nadd gathered his family one last time. He told them he was dying, that his time as king was ending, but he assured them that death was not the end for one who truly understood the Force. He would watch over Onderon still. He would guide his descendants. The dynasty would continue with his blessing. Most of them thought he meant this metaphorically. A few, those he had trained most extensively, understood the truth. Their king was not planning to die. he was planning to transform. When Freedon Nadd's physical body finally gave out, it was not in battle or through violence. He simply lay down in his sarcophagus, closed his eyes, and let go of the flesh that had served him for so long. His last breath came quietly. His heart beat one final time, and then stopped. And his spirit, bound by rituals and runes and a lifetime of dark side devotion, remained anchored to his corpse, to his tomb, to Onderon itself. Death had come for the Dark Lord of Onderon, but the Dark Lord had refused to go. The funeral of Freedon Nadd was a spectacle that Onderon would remember for generations. The entire population of Aziz turned out to mourn their god-king. His body lay in state for 3 days in the palace's great hall, dressed in ceremonial robes and surrounded by the artifacts of his power. Thousands filed past to pay their respects to the man who had ruled them for over a century, who had protected them from the dangers of their world, who had made Onderon strong. They did not know that consciousness still lingered in the corpse they mourned, that Freedon Nadd watched his own funeral through senses that transcended physical eyes, that he felt their grief and fear as tangible things, dark emotions that fed the power sustaining his spirit. The burial ceremony was conducted with full honors. His sarcophagus was sealed and placed in the tomb beneath the palace, in the chamber he had spent years preparing. The entrance was sealed with a massive stone door. Royal guards were posted to ensure no grave robbers would disturb the Dark Lord's rest. The official period of mourning lasted a full month. His grandson, now crowned king, took the throne with a heavy heart and secret knowledge. Freedon Nadd had taught him what to expect, what signs to watch for. The new king knew that his grandfather had not truly left Onderon. That presence remained waiting in the darkness beneath the palace, gathering strength in death as it had in life. The first manifestation came 6 months after the burial. The young king was alone in his private chambers late at night, reviewing documents of state when the temperature suddenly dropped, the candles flickered, and there, translucent and glowing with pale light, stood the spirit of Freedon Nadd. The king fell to his knees, not sure whether to be terrified or awed, probably both. "Grandfather," he whispered. The spirit smiled, and it was the same proud expression the king remembered from life. "I told you, death was not the end. Rise, grandson. You are king now. You do not kneel to ghosts." Over the following months, Nadd's spirit appeared regularly to his descendants, sometimes offering advice on matters of state, sometimes teaching dark side techniques to those with force sensitivity, sometimes simply observing, watching as Onderon continued along the path he had set it upon. He was not omnipresent or omnipotent. His influence was limited to Onderon itself, strongest near his tomb, growing weaker, the further from Aziz one traveled. But within those limits, he was very much still a power to be reckoned with. The dynasty he had founded continued. King followed king, queen followed queen. Some were wise rulers who maintained the traditions Nadd had established. Others were weak or foolish, and Nadd would appear to them in anger, demanding they uphold the standards he had set. A few, very few, were strong in the force and ambitious enough to seek the same immortality their ancestor had achieved. To these, Nadd taught willingly, sharing the secrets that might allow them to transcend death as he had. One such descendant, many generations removed, was Queen Aminoa. She ruled Onderon nearly 4,000 years after Nadd's death, and she possessed more force sensitivity than any of his bloodline since his own children. Nadd appeared to her when she was still a young princess, and began her education in the dark side immediately. By the time she took the throne, she was a formidable practitioner of Sith techniques, though she kept this secret from all but her most trusted servants. Another was King Omin, who came to power a few generations after Aminoa. He was so consumed by the dark side teachings Nadd provided that he neglected his physical health entirely. His body withered and failed while his force powers grew ever stronger. By the end of his reign, he was barely more than a living skeleton, kept alive through Sith alchemy and sustained by life support systems, but capable of channeling dark side energy in ways that would have impressed even his ancient ancestor. Through these vessels, through these descendants who opened themselves to his instruction, Nadd maintained his influence over Onderon. The Beast Wars continued as he had designed them. Criminals were exiled to the wilderness. Those who survived became beast riders. The cycle of conflict fed the dark side, and the dark side sustained Nadd's spirit. It was a perfect system, self-perpetuating and seemingly eternal. But immortality had its price, and Nadd was beginning to understand what that price truly meant. He could not feel, not truly, not anymore. The sensations of life, the simple pleasures of eating or touching or breathing, were lost to him forever. He existed in a state of constant observation without participation. He could see Onderon's suns rise and set through windows and through the eyes of the living, but he could not feel their warmth. He could watch feasts and celebrations, but taste nothing. He could manifest before the beautiful and the beloved, but never again know desire or affection. Emotions remained to him only in their darkest forms: anger, ambition, the satisfaction of dominance. These he could still feel, perhaps because they were so closely tied to the dark side itself. But joy, contentment, peace, these were as dead as his body. He began to understand what Naga Sadow must have experienced on Yavin 4, why the ancient spirit had seemed almost eager to find a student, to pass on its knowledge. Existence without life was a kind of torture. The years stretched into decades, the decades into centuries, and with each passing generation, the isolation grew more profound. The world changed around him while he remained static. Onderon's technology advanced. Its culture evolved. New traditions emerged while old ones faded. The galaxy beyond Onderon transformed in ways he could barely follow, could barely comprehend. He was a relic of an ancient age, preserved but not living, watching history unfold like a play performed for an audience of one. Sometimes, in moments of terrible clarity, he wondered if he had made a mistake, if perhaps the Jedi had been right about one thing at least, that accepting death was part of the natural order, that clinging to existence past its time was not victory but failure. But then one of his descendants would call upon him, would ask for his wisdom, would look at him with awe and fear and respect, and the doubt would fade. He was Freedon Nadd, Dark Lord of the Sith, conqueror of Onderon, master of powers that transcended mortality. His name would endure long after lesser beings had been forgotten. His influence would shape this world forever. The centuries continued their march. 1,000 years passed since his death, then 2,000, 3,000. The tomb remained undisturbed. His body perfectly preserved by the alchemical processes he had embedded in his sarcophagus. The palace above was rebuilt multiple times, but always in the same location, always directly above the tomb chamber. His descendants knew, even if they did not fully understand, that the source of their power lay in those depths. And Freedon Nadd waited, watched, guided, corrupted, a ghost whispering poison into the ears of kings and queens across millennia. The dark side made manifest, the price of immortality paid in full, not with death, but with a shadow of life that stretched on endlessly. He had achieved what so few Sith had managed. He had conquered death itself. But in doing so he had lost something essential, something that made existence worthwhile rather than merely possible. 4,000 years is a long time to regret a choice from which there is no return. By the time 4,000 years had passed since Freedon Nadd's physical death, his influence over Onderon had become woven into the planet's very identity. The dynasty he founded had experienced periods of strength and weakness, enlightenment and darkness, but through it all, his spirit remained, a constant presence, an eternal advisor, a ghost that refused to fade into legend. The royal family had grown to understand their ancestors' haunting as both blessing and curse. Those with Force sensitivity could perceive him clearly, could receive his teachings directly. Those without such gifts knew him only through family stories and the occasional unexplained phenomena that plagued the palace. Cold spots in certain rooms, whispers in empty corridors, the sense of being watched by unseen eyes. But it was in the descendants who opened themselves fully to his instruction that Nadd's corruption achieved its greatest successes, and none embraced his teachings more completely than King Omin. Omin came to power during a period of relative prosperity for Onderon. The Beast Wars had settled into predictable patterns. Trade with neighboring systems flourished. The city of Iziz was larger and more advanced than ever before, but Omin cared nothing for prosperity or peace. From his earliest years he had been able to see what others could not. The translucent figure of his ancient ancestor appearing in his chambers at night, promising power beyond imagination. Nadd recognized in Omin something he had not seen since his own life. Pure, uncomplicated ambition, a hunger for power that overwhelmed every other consideration. The young prince devoted himself to studying the dark side with an intensity that destroyed his health even as it magnified his abilities. He neglected food, sleep, physical exercise, everything except his meditations and practices. By the time he inherited the throne, his body was already failing. And Nadd encouraged this, pushed him further, taught him that the flesh was merely a vessel expendable in the pursuit of true power, showed him techniques for sustaining life through the Force alone, drawing energy from the suffering around him rather than from food or rest. Omin became a living testament to the dark side's ability to transcend physical limitations, but the cost was horrifying. His wife, Queen Amanoa, watched her husband's transformation with growing horror and fascination. She too could sense Nadd's presence, though more faintly than Omina. The ancient spirit appeared to her occasionally, testing her, judging whether she was worthy of his instruction. When Omina's condition deteriorated to the point where he could barely move without assistance, confined to a specialized chair that kept his withered body alive through mechanical means and Sith alchemy, Amanoa found herself taking on more responsibilities as ruler. And Nadd was there, whispering guidance, offering power, showing her that she need not be merely the wife of a king. She could be a queen in her own right, with abilities that would make her feared and respected. The training began slowly. Meditation techniques that seemed harmless, exercises in sensing the emotions of others, but gradually, inevitably, the lessons deepened into true Sith instruction. Amanoa proved an excellent student. Unlike her husband, she maintained her physical health even as her Force powers grew. She learned to project calm and normalcy while hiding tremendous strength beneath the surface. The people of Iziz saw her as a stabilizing influence on the increasingly erratic King Omin, never suspecting that she had become nearly as dangerous as he was. But Nadd's influence extended beyond the royal family. Over the centuries, he had appeared to numerous individuals throughout Onderon society. Not always royalty, sometimes servants who displayed Force sensitivity, occasionally soldiers or scholars who showed the right combination of ambition and moral flexibility. To each he offered knowledge, power, purpose, and slowly, methodically, he built something that had not existed since the ancient Sith Empire. A cult, hidden in the depths of Iziz, operating in absolute secrecy, worshipping him as a dark god and following Sith teachings that had supposedly been extinct for millennia. They called themselves Naddists, and their numbers grew with each passing generation. They established hidden temples in forgotten sections beneath the city, chambers carved from bedrock and covered in Sith inscriptions copied from Nadd's own tomb. They performed rituals in the dead of night, sacrifices that fed the dark side and strengthened Nadd's presence. They recruited carefully, seeking out the disillusioned and ambitious, those who felt society had denied them their rightful place. By the time of King Omin and Queen Aminoa, the Naddist movement had become a shadow government within Onderon. They controlled key positions in the city guard. They had agents among the merchants and nobles. They operated a network of information gathering that would have impressed intelligence agencies in more advanced systems. And at the center of it all, directing everything from his tomb beneath the palace, was the spirit who had started it all 4,000 years earlier. But why? What was the purpose of this elaborate manipulation spanning so many centuries? The truth was something Nadd himself had only gradually come to understand over his long existence as a spirit. He had achieved immortality. But what good was immortality if he remained trapped on a single world, limited in his influence, watching history happen rather than shaping it on a galactic scale? The Sith Empire was gone. The great Dark Lords were dust. Their philosophy survived only in hidden texts and the teachings of ghosts. If the Sith were to truly return, if they were to reclaim their place as the dominant force philosophy in the galaxy, it would require more than one ancient spirit haunting a single planet. It would require living practitioners, true Dark Lords who could move through the galaxy freely, who could challenge the Jedi Order directly, who could build something lasting. Nadd had been waiting, preparing, building a power base on Onderon that could serve as the foundation for something greater. The Naddist movement was his instrument. King Omin and Queen Aminoa were his weapons, but he needed something more. He needed students who could surpass what he had been in life. Students who would take his teachings and use them to reshape the galaxy itself. And he knew, with the patience that only immortality could provide, that such students would eventually come. The Force moved in patterns. History repeated itself. Jedi would fall, just as he had fallen. Ambitious individuals would seek out forbidden knowledge, just as he had sought it. And when they came to Onderon, drawn by rumors of dark side power, he would be waiting. The signs were beginning to appear. Even in its isolated corner of the galaxy, Onderon could not remain hidden forever. The Jedi Order, grown complacent after centuries without facing a true Sith threat, was starting to sense disturbances. Reports filtered back to Coruscant of a world where the dark side had unusual strength, where Force sensitives exhibited abilities that should have been extinct, where ancient philosophies somehow persisted despite the passage of millennia. Nadd felt their attention turning toward Onderon, like the slow focusing of a vast lens. The Jedi were coming, and with them would come opportunities he had waited 4,000 years to exploit. Young Jedi, powerful and idealistic, believing themselves immune to the corruption that had claimed so many of their predecessors. These would be his raw material. These would be the ones he would reshape into the new generation of Sith Lords. He began preparing Omin and Aminoa for what was to come. More intensive training, access to artifacts and holocrons that he had kept hidden even from his most trusted descendants. The full truth about his plans and ambitions, they responded with fanatic devotion. The chance to be part of something greater than themselves, to serve as instruments in the rebirth of the Sith Order, gave their existence meaning beyond mere rulership of a single world. The Naddist cult received similar instructions. Prepare for conflict. Strengthen your numbers. When the time comes, you will be called upon to fight, not just to defend Onderon, but to be part of a transformation that will shake the entire galaxy. And so they waited, all of them. The Ghost and the Cultists and the corrupted royals waited for the Jedi to arrive and unknowingly trigger the next phase of a plan that had been 4 millennia in the making. Nadd had learned patience. He had learned to think in terms of centuries rather than years. He had become something more and less than human, a consciousness devoted entirely to a single goal. The Sith would return, not as scattered individuals hiding in shadows, but as a force that could challenge the Jedi directly. And Freedon Nadd, the fallen Jedi who had murdered his master and crowned himself a king, who had conquered death itself and haunted Onderon for 4,000 years, would be remembered as the architect of their resurrection. His monument would not be merely the city above his tomb. It would be the galaxy itself, reshaped according to Sith philosophy. His legacy would dwarf even what Naga Sadow had achieved. All he needed now was for the right pieces to move into position, for destiny to deliver unto him the tools he required, for the Force itself to provide the students he had waited so long to corrupt. And in the year 3998 before the Battle of Yavin, those pieces finally began to move. The Jedi expedition arrived at Onderon during what should have been a routine diplomatic mission. Master Aka Joti, a respected member of the Order known for his wisdom and powerful connection to the Force, had been dispatched to investigate reports of dark side activity in the Japrael sector. With him came 3 of his most promising students, Pulik Kel Droma, a confident and skilled young Jedi, whose prowess with a lightsaber was matched by his absolute certainty in the righteousness of the Jedi path. Kel Droma, Ulik's brother, more thoughtful and mechanically inclined but equally devoted to the light, and Tot Dunata, a Twi'lek Jedi, whose connection to nature and living things made him particularly sensitive to disturbances in the Force. The moment their ship entered Onderon's atmosphere, all 3 students felt it, a heaviness in the Force, unlike anything they had encountered before. Master Aka simply nodded, his suspicions confirmed. This world was drowning in darkness, and it had been for a very, very long time. Their arrival in Gs coincided with one of the periodic Beast Rider attacks. The Jedi helped defend the city, their lightsabers cutting through the chaos with practiced efficiency. The citizens who had lived with such attacks for generations were nonetheless awed by the Jedi's abilities. Here were warriors who fought with grace rather than brutality, who protected without killing unnecessarily, who embodied everything the Jedi Order claimed to represent. Queen Amanara received them in the palace with elaborate courtesy. She was charming, diplomatic, expressing gratitude for their assistance and welcoming them to stay as long as necessary to investigate whatever concerns had brought them to her world. Master Aka sensed deception immediately, but he was too wise to reveal his suspicions. Better to observe and learn before taking action. The investigation began carefully. The Jedi explored Izzy's, speaking with citizens, examining the city's history, trying to understand the source of the overwhelming dark side presence they all felt. Ulik Keldroma took particular interest in the Beast Wars tradition, finding it barbaric and unnecessary. He believed, with the certainty of youth, that such violence could be ended through negotiation and understanding. Perhaps the Beast Riders could be brought into the city, integrated into society, their exile ended through compassion rather than perpetuated through tradition. Master Aka was less optimistic but allowed his student to pursue this idealistic approach. Sometimes the best lessons were learned through failure rather than instruction. It was during an expedition into the wilderness that Ulik first encountered something that would change the trajectory of his entire life. While attempting to mediate between city defenders and beast riders, he witnessed Queen Amanoa arrive on the battlefield and unleash dark side powers that should not have existed. Lightning erupted from her hands. Warriors fell screaming as she drained their life force. Her eyes glowed yellow with channeled hatred as she single-handedly broke the Beast Rider assault. The revelation stunned the Jedi. This was not simply a world with strong dark side presence. This was a world ruled by active practitioners of Sith techniques. The implications were staggering. The Sith were supposed to be extinct, their teachings lost, their philosophy relegated to ancient history. Yet here was a queen wielding their powers openly. Master Aka confronted Amanoa directly, and she no longer bothered to hide what she was. The dark side had given her strength. The teachings of her ancestor, the legendary Freedon Nadd, had made her powerful beyond anything the weak philosophy of the Jedi could achieve. If the Jedi interfered with Onderon, they would learn just how powerful the dark side could be. The situation escalated rapidly. The Naddist cult, which had remained hidden for generations, suddenly emerged from the shadows. Hundreds of dark side practitioners, warriors and assassins and sorcerers filled the streets of Aziz. What had seemed like a stable if troubled world revealed itself to be a powder keg that had finally ignited. The Freedon Nadd uprising, as history would later call it, had begun. The battle for Aziz raged for days. Jedi and loyal city defenders against Naddists and corrupted guards. Queen Aminoa revealed the full extent of her abilities, and she was formidable. Master Arca engaged her directly, while his students fought to protect civilians and contain the chaos spreading through the city. Buildings burned, innocent people died, caught in the crossfire. The darkness Nadd had spent 4,000 years cultivating erupted like a volcano. Ulic Qel-Droma fought with skill and passion, but something was happening to him. Each time he struck down a Naddist, each moment he spent channeling the Force in combat, he felt the dark side pulling at him, whispering, promising that if he just embraced his anger, just allowed himself to truly hate these people who were causing such suffering, he could end the conflict immediately. Victory through strength, peace through domination. The same lies that had corrupted Freedon Nadd 4,000 years earlier, now being whispered to a new generation. He resisted, but the seeds were planted, and in the shadows, watching through the eyes of his followers, Freedon Nadd smiled. This was exactly what he had been waiting for. A Jedi powerful enough to be dangerous, idealistic enough to be manipulated, proud enough to believe he could handle what others could not. The uprising culminated in a final confrontation in the palace throne room. Master Arca, demonstrating why he was considered one of the Order's most powerful members, overwhelmed Queen Aminoa's defenses. Without the dark side sustaining her, without hatred fueling her strength, she was simply an aging woman who had burned through her natural lifespan through Sith techniques. She collapsed, dying, her last words a warning that the Jedi had no idea what they were truly facing. But the victory felt hollow. As Aminoa died, the Jedi felt a surge in the Force, something vast and ancient and malevolent making its presence known. The temperature in the throne room dropped, candles flickered and went out, and there, manifesting before them, was the translucent figure of Freedon Nadd himself. The ancient spirit regarded the Jedi with contempt and amusement. They thought they had won by defeating one corrupted queen. They understood nothing. He had been guiding Onderon for 4,000 years. He had built the systems that sustained the dark side on this world. They could kill every Naddist, could purge every dark side practitioner, and it would change nothing, because the source of corruption was not any living being. It was him, and he could not be defeated by lightsabers or force powers. He was beyond such things. Master Arca listened to this boasting and came to a terrible realization. As long as Freedon Nadd's remains stayed beneath the palace, as long as his spirit had an anchor point at the heart of Aziz, his influence would continue. The tomb was the key. They would need to move his sarcophagus, remove it from the city, break the connection between the spirit and its source of power. But where? Where could you take the remains of a Sith Lord that had achieved immortality through dark side binding? Destroying the body was impossible without risk of releasing his spirit entirely. Keeping it anywhere on Onderon might allow him to maintain influence. The decision was made to transport Nadd's sarcophagus to Dexon, Onderon's largest moon. The savage jungle world where the Beast Wars tradition originated, where exiled criminals had learned to survive among predatory beasts. It was isolated, dangerous, and most importantly separate from Aziz. The hope was that moving the remains would weaken Nadd's ability to corrupt future generations. King Omin, who had been suspiciously absent during the uprising, was discovered in his chambers. The withered king, more corpse than living man, had been too weak to fight, but remained completely devoted to his ancestors' teachings. He raved about how the Jedi were fools, how moving Nadd's remains would only serve the ancient spirit's plans, how everything was proceeding exactly as it should. The Jedi dismissed his words as the ravings of a mind destroyed by dark side corruption. They proceeded with the plan, transporting Nadd's sarcophagus with great care and ceremony to Daxon. Ulic Keldroma participated in the expedition, and the entire time he felt Nadd's presence stronger than ever. The spirit seemed almost pleased, laughing at some joke the Jedi could not comprehend. As they placed the sarcophagus in a tomb on Daxon, surrounded by the howls of jungle predators and the oppressive humidity of the moon's ecosystem, Nadd's spirit appeared one final time. His translucent form stood over his own remains, and his expression was one of absolute satisfaction. "You have done exactly what I needed," the spirit said, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. 4,000 years I have waited on Onderon, 4,000 years preparing, and now you have brought me to where the true power sleeps, to where the ancient temples of the Sith await, to where the next phase begins. Then he was gone, fading like morning mist. The Jedi stood in confused silence, wondering what they had missed. What had they done? What had they failed to understand? On Daxon, far from the city but closer to something far more dangerous, the spirit of Freedon Nadd settled into his new domain and prepared for the students who would soon arrive. Everything was proceeding perfectly. Daxon was not merely a moon. It was a monument to ancient darkness, and the Jedi who had moved Freedon Nadd's remains there had no idea what they had truly done. Beneath the jungle canopy, hidden by centuries of overgrowth, lay the ruins of Sith temples that predated even the Great Hyperspace War. This moon had been sacred to the ancient Sith, a place where Dark Lords came to perform rituals too dangerous for inhabited worlds. When Naga Sadow fled here after his defeat, he had chosen this location deliberately. The dark side was woven into Daxon's very essence, stronger even than on Onderon itself. And now Freedon Nadd's remains rested at the heart of this nexus, his spirit finally free from the limitations that had bound him beneath Iziz's palace. He could feel the ancient energies responding to his presence, awakening after centuries of dormancy. The temples called to him, the tombs of other Sith Lords, long dead but not entirely gone, acknowledged him as kin. For the first time in 4,000 years, Nadd felt something almost like joy. But he was not alone on the moon for long. The galaxy was in turmoil, and darkness called to darkness across the light years. Exar Kun arrived on Daxon in the year 3997 BBY, less than a year after Nadd's remains had been moved there. Kun was everything Nadd had hoped to find, a fallen Jedi of tremendous power and dangerous intellect, already deep into his exploration of the dark side, but not yet lost beyond redemption. He had come seeking ancient Sith knowledge, following clues that led from Korriban to Yavin 4 and now to this jungle moon, where rumors spoke of tombs containing holocrons and artifacts from the old Sith Empire. Nadd watched Kun's approach with predatory patience. This was a prize worth the weight of millennia. Not merely a powerful Force user, but a Jedi who had fallen through pride and obsession with knowledge, rather than simple hatred or fear. The best kind of corruption, the kind that believed itself justified, that thought it was pursuing truth rather than surrendering to darkness. The spirit manifested before Kun in the ruins of a temple, and the young fallen Jedi was not frightened. He was fascinated. Here was Freedon Nadd, the legendary Dark Lord of Onderon, the Sith who had ruled for a century and then haunted a world for 4,000 years. Kun's questions came rapidly. How had Nadd achieved immortality? What were the limits of his power? As a spirit, could such techniques be learned by others? Nadd answered carefully, revealing just enough to intrigue while holding back the deeper truths. He offered to teach Khun, to share the knowledge of the ancient Sith, to make him more powerful than any Jedi could imagine. But first, Khun would need to prove himself worthy. There were tests. Trials that would require him to embrace the dark side fully, without reservation or hesitation. Khun accepted eagerly, believing himself strong enough to use dark side knowledge without being consumed by it. It was the same mistake countless Jedi had made before him, the same mistake Nadd himself had made 4,000 years earlier. The training began. Nadd taught Khun Sith alchemy and sorcery, showing him how to create talismans of immense power, how to bind creatures to his will, how to drain life force from the living. He revealed the locations of ancient holocrons hidden in Daxon's temples, each containing teachings from different Sith Lords of ages past. He guided Khun through meditations that opened him to aspects of the Force the Jedi Order had spent centuries pretending did not exist. And with each lesson, Khun changed. His eyes took on the yellow tint that marked deep immersion in the dark side. His speech patterns shifted, becoming more arrogant, more dismissive of any philosophy that disagreed with his growing certainty that he was destined for greatness. The brilliant scholar who had come to Daxon seeking knowledge was transforming into something darker and far more dangerous. But Nadd was not content with a single apprentice. The galaxy was large, and his plans required multiple instruments. While he worked with Exar Khun on Daxon, his influence continued to reach out through the Force to others who might serve his purposes. Ulic Qel-Droma had returned to Republic space after the events on Onderon, but the experience had changed him. The whispers he had heard during the Freedon Nadd uprising had not faded. If anything, they had grown stronger. He became obsessed with understanding the dark side, not to fall to it, but to fight it more effectively. At least that was what he told himself, and anyone who questioned his increasingly aggressive methods. When he infiltrated the Kryth, a dark side cult that had taken control of the Empress Teta system, Ulic believed he could maintain his identity as a Jedi while pretending to embrace darkness. It was a strategy Master Arca had warned against. It was arrogance disguised as tactical thinking, and it was exactly what Nadd had been counting on. The corruption of Ulic Qel-Droma happened gradually, so slowly he did not notice until it was too late. Each compromise, each time he used dark side techniques, while telling himself it was for a greater good, pushed him further from the light. When he killed rivals within the Kryth to maintain his cover, he told himself it was necessary. When he allowed atrocities to occur that he could have prevented, he rationalized that revealing himself too early would doom his mission. When he began to enjoy the power and fear he commanded, he pretended not to notice. By the time Exar Khun emerged from Daxon, transformed and declaring himself Dark Lord of the Sith, Ulic Qel-Droma was already lost. When the two finally met, brought together by what seemed like chance, but was actually Nadd's careful manipulation through the Force, they recognized each other immediately, not as enemies, as equals, as the twin pillars upon which a new Sith Order could be built. Nadd appeared before them, together, his spirit manifesting in all its terrible glory. He proclaimed them both Dark Lords, setting them on a path of conquest that would resurrect the Sith as a galactic power for the first time in a millennium. The Great Sith War, as it would come to be known, began with Nadd's blessing. His plan, so long in the making, was finally bearing fruit. But Exar Khun was more than Nadd had anticipated. The knowledge he had absorbed, the power he had accumulated, had elevated him beyond merely being a tool of his teacher's ambitions. He began to question Nadd's guidance, to push back against the ancient spirit's directives, to assert his own vision for what the Sith should become. The breaking point came during a ritual on Yavin 4, where Khan had established his primary fortress. He was attempting to unlock even deeper Sith secrets, power that would make him unquestionably the most powerful being in the galaxy. Nadd appeared and demanded he stop. Some knowledge was too dangerous, some powers too corrupting, even for Dark Lords. Khan needed to remain controllable, remain useful to Nadd's broader plans. Exar Kun laughed. After everything Nadd had taught him, after all the speeches about embracing power without limitation, now the ancient spirit wanted to impose restrictions. How perfectly hypocritical, how utterly Jedi. Nadd realized his mistake too late. He had created something he could no longer control. The very lessons he had taught so well had produced a student who now saw him not as master but as obstacle, as competition for the title of ultimate Sith authority. "You have taught me everything you know," Kun said, his voice cold and certain. "You have given me access to knowledge from a dozen ancient Dark Lords. You have shown me how to transcend normal limitations. And now you want to hold me back, to keep me from achieving what you yourself could not." The spirit of Freedon Nadd felt something he had not experienced in 4,000 years. Fear, real visceral terror at what was about to happen. He tried to reason with Kun, to explain that there was a difference between power and wisdom, that some boundaries existed for good reasons, but his words fell on ears that had long since stopped listening to anyone's voice but their own. Exar Kun reached out through the Force, drawing on techniques learned from multiple Sith holocrons, channeling energies from the Massassi temples surrounding them. He attacked not Nadd's physical remains, but his spiritual essence itself. The bindings that had kept the ancient spirit anchored to the material world for 4 millennia were unraveled with brutal efficiency. The carefully constructed rituals that had ensured his immortality were undone by someone who understood them completely. Nadd fought back with everything he had, 4,000 years of accumulated knowledge and power unleashed in a final desperate struggle. The battle between master and student was invisible to normal eyes, but would have been blinding to anyone with foresight. Reality itself seemed to bend and warp around them as two immense wills clashed. But Exar Kun was alive, and Nadd was not. Kun could draw on the physical world, on the dark side nexus of Yavin 4, on the life force of the Massassi servants he had corrupted. Nadd had only his own essence, nothing to replenish what was being spent. The outcome was inevitable. With a final surge of power, Exar Kun shattered the anchors, holding Freedon Nadd to existence. The spirit that had persisted for 4,000 years, that had outlasted empires and witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, was torn apart and scattered across the Force. The consciousness that had been Freedon Nadd fragmented into nothing, unable to reform, unable to persist. For the first time since his death on Onderon, so many centuries ago, he was truly gone. In his final moment, Nadd understood with perfect clarity the price of his 4,000-year existence. He had manipulated kings and corrupted dynasties. He had built a cult and orchestrated the return of the Sith. He had achieved a form of immortality that few could even attempt. And in the end, his greatest achievement was creating the instrument of his own final destruction. The student who had learned everything he had to teach and then used that knowledge to eliminate him. 4,000 years of ambition, 4,000 years of corruption, 4,000 years of refusing to accept death. And in a single moment it ended. Not with the grandeur he had imagined, but with the brutal efficiency of power passing to a new generation. Freedon Nadd, the fallen Jedi who became a Sith Lord, who conquered a world and haunted it for millennia, who served as architect of the Great Sith War, finally ceased to exist. His legacy would continue through those he had corrupted. His name would be remembered in Sith history. But the consciousness, the spirit, the essence that had been Freedon Nadd was gone. Mortality had claimed him at last, 4,000 years late, but no less final for the delay. And so the spirit of Freedon Nadd passed from the galaxy, scattered like smoke on a wind that would never allow him to reform. 4,000 years of existence ended in a moment, and the universe continued without pause. Stars still burned, worlds still turned. Life persisted, indifferent to the final death of one who had refused to die for so very long. But the legacy he left behind would shape galactic history for years to come. The Great Sith War that Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Drama waged across Republic space was a direct result of Nadd's corruption. Thousands died in conflicts that might never have occurred without his influence. Entire systems burned. The Jedi Order suffered losses not seen in centuries, and though the war eventually ended with the defeat of both Dark Lords, the damage had been done. The Sith had returned to galactic consciousness, no longer ancient myth but recent memory. On Onderon, the immediate aftermath of Nadd's destruction was felt like the lifting of a terrible weight. Those sensitive to the Force reported that the oppressive darkness which had hung over the planet for millennia suddenly lessened. Not disappeared entirely, for 4,000 years of dark side saturation could not be erased in a moment, but diminished, weakened, no longer actively malevolent. The Naddist cult, deprived of the spirit that had guided them for generations, collapsed into infighting and fragmentation without Nadd's vision to unite them. They were simply individuals with dark side training and no clear purpose. Most were hunted down by Jedi and Republic forces in the years following the Great Sith War. A few escaped into the galaxy, carrying fragments of Sith knowledge to various corners of space where they might find new students or establish new cults. The seeds of darkness, once planted, are difficult to completely eradicate. The royal family of Onderon, freed from their ancestors' corrupting influence, attempted to rebuild their world's reputation and culture. The Beast Wars tradition was finally ended, not through force but through reconciliation. The Beast Riders were invited back into Aziz, not as conquered enemies but as citizens who had been unjustly exiled. It took generations to fully heal those wounds, but the process began. Onderon slowly transformed from a world defined by darkness into something approaching normalcy. Nadd's tomb beneath what had been the royal palace was sealed permanently. The chamber where his sarcophagus had rested for so long was filled with rubble and collapsed deliberately, ensuring no future dark side practitioners could use it as a focal point for rituals. On Dexon, where his remains had finally been destroyed during Exar Kun's final assault, the jungle reclaimed the temples. Vines covered the ancient stones. Trees grew through carved archways. Nature, patient and persistent, slowly erased the visible evidence of Sith presence. But Freedon Nadd's name endured in the records. Jedi scholars studied his life as a cautionary tale about the seduction of the dark side. How a promising knight could fall through ambition and impatience. How the rejection of limits led inevitably to corruption. How even death could not stop the spread of darkness if proper precautions were not taken. His story became required study for Padawans, a warning that would be repeated for generations. In Sith circles, those secret practitioners who survived and continued the dark side tradition in hiding, Nadd was remembered differently. Not as a warning, but as an example of what could be achieved through determination and refusal to accept limitations. He had killed his master and survived the consequences. He had found ancient knowledge and used it to crown himself king. He had conquered death itself and maintained influence for 4 millennia. That his eventual destruction came at the hands of his own student was viewed not as tragedy, but as the proper working of Sith philosophy. The strong survive, the weak perish. The teacher is eventually surpassed by the student who has learned well. This was the way of the Sith. This was the legacy Nadd had helped preserve and pass forward, not individual immortality, but the immortality of the philosophy itself. Dark Lord would follow Dark Lord across the centuries, each building on the knowledge of those who came before, each eventually falling to make room for the next generation. An endless cycle of ambition and betrayal, of power gained and power lost. And perhaps that was the truest understanding of what Freedon Nadd had achieved. Not the conquest of a single world, not even his 4,000 years of spiritual persistence, but his role as a link in the chain connecting the ancient Sith Empire to the conflicts that would eventually culminate in the rise of the Galactic Empire millennia later. He had ensured the knowledge survived. He had proven that the dark side could not be eradicated by wishful thinking and denial. He had forced the galaxy to acknowledge that darkness was not merely ancient history, but an eternal aspect of the Force itself. The Jedi who had fought against his influence, masters like Jyoti, who had given their lives to contain the darkness on Onderon, would also be remembered. Their sacrifice ensured that Nadd's corruption did not spread unchecked. Their wisdom in eventually recognizing that his spirit needed to be destroyed, rather than merely contained, prevented even worse outcomes. The eternal struggle between light and dark played out across this one story among countless others throughout galactic history. In the end, what remains of any life but the ripples it creates? Freedon Nadd's physical body was dust. His spirit was scattered beyond recovery. But the consequences of his choices echoed forward through time in ways he could never have fully anticipated. Students he never met would learn from holocrons he helped preserve, techniques he mastered would be passed down through generations of Sith. And the fundamental questions his life raised about power and mortality, ambition and wisdom, would be debated long after his name faded from common memory. Tonight, if you were to visit Onderon, you would find a world mostly at peace. Iziz is a modern city, connected to the greater galaxy through trade and culture. The jungles are still dangerous, still home to creatures that could kill the unwary, but they are natural dangers now, rather than deliberately crafted nightmares. The moons orbit overhead, Da Sin among them, covered in vegetation that hides the scars of ancient conflicts. The Force flows through Onderon, as it flows through all things. Neither light nor dark dominates absolutely. Balance, imperfect and constantly shifting, but balance nonetheless. The old temples sleep beneath jungle growth. The sealed tombs hold only bones and fading memories, and the spirits that once walked those places have passed beyond, into whatever awaits consciousness when even immortality ends. There is peace in understanding that all things, even those that seem eternal, eventually transform into something else. Freedon Nadd believed he could escape the natural cycles of existence. For 4,000 years he succeeded, but the Force is patient, and the universe insists on balance. What is bound will eventually be released. What persists beyond its time will eventually yield to what comes next. The stars above Onderon shine as they have for billions of years, and will for billions more. Patient witnesses to the brief flames of individual ambition burning bright and then fading into darkness. The story of one fallen Jedi who became a Sith Lord, who conquered death and was eventually conquered by his own legacy, is just one story among countless others written in the endless book of galactic history. And now that story has been told, the chronicle is complete. Let it settle into your thoughts like dust finding rest after a long journey. Let the images fade like dreams half remembered. The temples sleeping under distant moons, the cities transformed by time, the eternal dance of light and shadow across the galaxy. If you enjoyed this journey into the ancient history of the Star Wars universe, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the lore and legends that make this galaxy so rich and complex. There are countless other stories waiting to be told. Other fallen Jedi and risen Sith Lords, other worlds transformed by the Force, other mysteries sleeping in ancient tombs. But for now, rest. Let the story settle. Let your breathing slow and deepen. Somewhere in the galaxy, far, far away, under stars you will never see, on worlds you will never visit, the Force flows on, connecting all things, balancing light and darkness, ensuring that every ending is also a beginning. And in that endless flow, in that eternal cycle, there is peace. Not the peace of triumph or victory, but the peace of acceptance. The peace of understanding that we are all part of something greater than ourselves, something that continues long after our individual flames have gone out. The story of Freedon Nadd is finished, but the galaxy endures. The Force endures. And tomorrow, there will be new stories to discover, new legends to explore, new mysteries sleeping in the shadows, waiting for someone curious enough to seek them out. Until then, drift peacefully into dreams. Let the vastness of space and time cradle your thoughts. Let the ancient legends fade into comfortable darkness. Let sleep come gently, naturally, like a tide returning to shore. The galaxy is vast. The night is long. And rest, true rest, awaits.